Hello, my name is Tara Keene, and my question that I'm presenting on is question number 5. Is United Methodism a world church? The issue raised by this question is about whether our current structure is a global church and what the future structure of the United Methodist Church can be and what it should look like. While in the past, relationships have been relationships described as international, in the 1980s, the term globalization became the favored term to describe what was happening as a new concept of how societies related to each other. Where the international concept was like a patchwork quilt of nations with borders with a web of transporter networks, the newer concept of globalization referred to a process where socialization had relatively distanceless and borderless qualities so that people could start interacting with each other in more complex ways and started interacting on more of a planetary unit. Currently, Methodism is what they consider an extended national confession model, a particular doctrine with members primarily in one country, with additional churches in a few other nations and regions. The church is global in that we have significant mission and ministry in Africa, Europe, and the Philippines, and the United States. We're international in that our ministry reaches across Europe, Asia, North America, Latin America, and the Pacific and Africa. Janice Love raises the question in her piece, Is United Methodism a world church? On whether, when the United Methodist Church is calling for a global church, what they're calling for is moving from the extended national model that we are currently to being a global confessional model, which is something more like the Roman Catholic Church or the World Methodist Council. This also raises the question about whether globalization is something that we really want to do, because globalization is not seen as a positive concept by everyone. While some see it as a web of transborder networks and increased communication, some people see it as a method of world domination and control. However, if we don't do or seek some sort of change, what is at stake is our future as a denomination. While we are facing the question of inclusion with LGBTQ, that question aside, if we do get our house in order with that question, we need to look at where we are headed, assuming we can resolve those issues. In a report from the bishops, it stated that if the United Methodist Church does not take the step of becoming a global church, it will most likely face the danger of becoming a fragmented into autonomous churches in various nations of the world, having something like a United Methodist Church, a Korean United Methodist Church, and an African United Methodist Church, instead of all being united as one denomination. So, what does the Book of Discipline have to say, or the Book of Resolutions? The Book of Discipline sets the basic structure for jurisdictional conferences in the United States and by geography, and for central conferences outside the United States by region. The Book of Resolutions doesn't so much address the structure of the United Methodist Church, but it does address interactions and ideals of how we should act with each other internationally. There are resolutions such as number 6025 pertaining to globalization and the impact on human dignity and human rights. There are also resolutions specific to relations to the continents, such as Africa, number 6081, dealing with African growth and development. There are also resolutions specific to countries such as Liberia, Congo, Korea, Haiti, and peace with Afghanistan. So, what is the history behind this question? The Methodist Episcopal Church broke, of course, from the British Methodists in 1784. The next century was a period of colonial mission and colonization by both British and the United States Methodists. The United Methodist Church established the American colonies of the Philippines and Liberia, as well as some in Latin America. Britain, which had been the leading world power declined after World War I when the United States took the lead as the leading world power with Pax Americana after World War II. In the 1970s, the Pax Americana was replaced by the Pax G3, also referred now as the G7 presently. After the end of World War II, the colonies of Britain and America began to become more independent as Britain negotiated the end of their formal roles in colonial power. Those former colonial territories struggled as they learned that becoming independent did not mean that they were economically independent. They found themselves struggling as third world countries and at the mercy of the international economy. And many of them, dictatorships took over, and ordinary people found themselves with very little control over the kind of government or power that took over in their country. Following in the footsteps of the independence of their countries, the churches that were formerly mission churches of the colonies became independent and self-governing churches in the newly independent states. Some Methodist churches made their own national Methodist identity. This happened in Latin America churches. Some in Africa, Europe, and the Philippines chose to stay tied to their parent churches from Britain and the United States. Some of the questions that Janice Love raises in her piece that make issue of globalization relevant today are, do we seek to raise membership in outside territories because of the decline in our own denomination in the United States? Is that what makes us more eager to build institutions in other countries? Are we just trying to compensate our decline by building outside our own country? Some problems with our current structure include that General Conference occurs every 4 years, and it does not occur outside the United States, which makes travel very expensive and very difficult for those from poorer countries. There are no provisions for structural relationships between various central conferences. The shifting growth of Methodism is moving from the United States and Europe to Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and our structure does not represent that. The Forum on the Global Nature of Church proposed a creation of regional forums that would serve as a framework for exploring the local and global nature of the Methodist Church. They proposed an African forum, the United States Forum, a European forum, and a Philippine forum, and the Global Forum, and these took place from 2008 to 2012. In 2012, the Northeastern Jurisdictional Conference authorized the creation of a task force to develop recommendations regarding the global structure of the United Methodist Church. It was appointed by the College of Bishops in mid-2013. They were to work with the Connectional Table, the Standing Committee on Central Conference, and jurisdictional groups in the Western and North Central jurisdictions. They put forth a proposal that the General Conference would be named the Global Connectional Conference, to be responsible for a global book of discipline, and that the UMC could be divided into 4 continent-wide connections: Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. Each of these 4 connections would have the option of organizing into regions, and each connection would be responsible for its own connection-wide book of discipline, relevant to matters that are not global. Annual conference would remain the same. In one article, this appeared that it was to come before General Conference in 2020 for a vote, but in an article by the Christian Century, it looked like it made its way to General Conference in 2016 and was struck down as out of order on constitutional grounds. So what is the solution to the problem raised by this question? Well, to me, the proposal of 2015 made by the board seemed to be a great solution. It took each continent's opinion into regard in the formation of the idea, and it would have taken us from being centered in the United States into essentially having 4 quadrants that would be equally represented. Each quadrant would have had its own unique book of discipline for matters that were not universal, and there would be a uniting global book of discipline for universal standards. To me, that would allow for the cultural diversity to be represented in each local book of discipline, so as not to be instituting neocolonialism. Now, from what I read of the material, I understand that it seemed to be struck down as unconstitutional. I think going forward, we're really going to have to figure out how we can restructure without being considered unconstitutional. If any dramatic change is considered unconstitutional, how can we move forward? If What do we do if we cannot start over with rebranding so that we can accomplish what we need to do? Do we have to start a new church that swallows up our existing church for that to happen? Is our structure writing our own death warrant? At the very least, if we cannot do what is written in the proposal, I think we need to take elements of it and somehow need to adapt them to our existing structure. A way to start that would be to rotate the general conference between continents so that travel is just not to the United States. I think that rotating between the four primary areas, Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, would be a start. I think if we're not allowed to write local books of discipline, maybe we need to allow local books of resolution for each continent area. For example, much of our book of resolutions has to do with relations between our country and other countries or matters that pertain to the United States. A local book of resolutions for Asia could have resolutions pertaining to the book of discipline that might be meaningful for Asia and their surrounding territories, nations, and issues. Those are my, and that is my thought on that. Thank you.